Hello, my name is Peter Leech and I'm musical director of Costanzi Consort, a choir based in North Somerset. And obviously, like so many other choirs over the last 2 years, we've been drastically affected by COVID-19, been rehearsing on Zoom like so many other choirs, but we've had this rare opportunity to come together this time to perform socially distanced some music that we had been working on in the previous year and a half. One of the things we've been looking at is repertoire, choral repertoire, particularly from Rome, 18th century Rome, which is a particular research interest of mine, but also 18th century Russia, another research interest of mine. And you'd be amazed at how the two things are actually quite closely linked. Historically, you have a prominent cardinal in Rome called Henry Benedict Stuart, who is patronizing the best composers around, spending loads of money on church music in particular. And some of those composers included Baldassare Galuppi, who worked for him in the 1750s before he then went back to Venice and then on to Moscow. So Galuppi ends up at the court of Catherine the Great. Interestingly enough, while Galuppi's at the court of Catherine the Great, he attracts the interest of the young Dmitri Bortniansky, whom he takes back to Italy to study with him. So there's a direct link there already between the Russians and the Italians. Another Italian working in Rome during the 1750s was Giovanni Battista Casali. At this time, he was Maestro di Cappella at San Giovanni in Laterano and also at the Chiesa Nuova, Santa Maria in Vallicella. And these two churches, the archives contain a vast amount of Casali's music, and yet he's hardly ever performed. If you go onto many online sources, you'll find maybe 1 or 2 pieces of his music. So we're going to start with our very first piece, which is by Casali, an Improperium Expectavit from the Liturgy of Holy Week, the opening incipit, my heart expected reproach and misery. I desired one who would grieve with me, yet there was none to find. Our next piece, Dostojno jest, by Dmitri Bortniansky, was probably composed towards the end of the 18th century, possibly also at the beginning of the 19th. It's very difficult to date some of Bortniansky's music because the original manuscripts are lost and a lot of the early printed editions are also sparse. There were fires in the Imperial Capella during the 19th century which wiped out a lot of the music collection. But what we do know is that Bortniansky, having gone to Italy to study with Galuppi in Venice, returned a master of the contrapuntal style that was prevalent in Italy at that time. But he also wrote, in a style which is characterized by block chords, what we would call homophonic. So this next piece, the Dostoyno, very much moves in that block chord fashion, very similar, in fact, to ancient Russian music, which he tried to absorb the qualities of, as well as blending that with the Italianate style of Galuppi and Giuseppe Sarti and some of the other composers from Italy working in Russia. So the next piece, Dmitri Bortniansky, Dostoyno jest, it is truly meet and right to bless you, ever blessed and most pure Mother of our God. For our next piece, we return to Rome. Scapulis suis obumbravit tibi. He will overshadow you with his pinions, and you will find refuge under his wings. This is a piece, an offertory for the first Sunday in Lent, and it's the sort of music that you would have heard in Lent going into San Giovanni in Laterano in the 1750s and 1760s. And one of the things that gets Casali bad press is the fact that he's seen as one of these slavish imitators of the Palestrina style. But in fact, what we're dealing with here with 18th century Roman composers is, yes, four-part a cappella, very much in the style of Palestrina, lots of imitative entries, but also melodic lines which are longer, constructs which are much more expansive, much more baroque in terms of dimension. And that is the key thing that makes Casali's music, for me, really interesting, because he'll often develop a kind of mantra in the piece where a harmonic progression is repeated over and over again, but not in the same voices. So you will get the same suspension in the tenors and basses, which then occurs in the sopranos and altos, or he'll overlap them. So he tends to enmesh his music with a degree of complexity, both rhythmically and harmonic. Sometimes, if he's in a more happy mood, he tends to stay in that major key and then maybe bring in, for example, in the next one, Scarpulis, it's in a happy F major, and then we move ever so briefly into D minor for a little touch of sadness. So listen out for the changes in the harmonic context, and then we get a very rousing triple time second half at the text Scuto circumdabit te. For our fourth piece, Commodetis Carnes, also by Giovanni Battista Casali, the text reading, "You will eat meats and you will be satiated with breads. This is the bread the Lord has given to you to be eaten." Of course, a text from Corpus Christi, a responsory for Corpus Christi. I mentioned F major and D minor. I mentioned those modulations. Here we start resolutely in D minor. But the thing that makes this piece especially fantastic for me is not only the expansive, baroque, elongated melodies, but also the chromaticism. Here, Costanzi is taking you on a journey initially through various tortured harmonic suspensions, occasional moments where there are block chords where everybody comes together, and then he fragments the whole piece again into a kind of disarray. The most exciting moment really is where the sopranos soar right up to an E flat, and we get lots of 9/8 and 2/3 and 7/6 harmonies, all working, chromatic lines twisted like a snake wrapping itself round a pipe. Until at the end, the whole thing finishes still in D minor, but not without some inflections along the way that give you hope, as well as a sense of dread. And that's, again, one of the things that about 18th century Roman music. Remember, this was performed in vast acoustics, huge. San Giovanni in Laterano is a cathedral-esque acoustic. And there are many reports about this music often being slightly chaotic in the sense that people couldn't hear each other on either side or in front or behind. So here at All Saints, we've got the opportunity really to close in the sound, even though we're socially distanced, still hear the enmeshment of that harmony and present a nice performance. Piece number 5 is a setting of the Ave Maria, again by Casali. This time we move out of that tortuous D minor into a much more mellifluous, almost comforting F major here. The opening motif with the sopranos imitated by the altos, dropping down the score, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, in, yes, Palestrina imitative style. But what we have here with his Ave Maria is, again, part of this mantra idea I was telling you about. For example, sometimes a statement, benedictus fructus ventris, benedicta tu in mulieribus. We get a suspension in the basses that's then imitated by the tenors and then by the altos and then across the score. And it comes back. Overlaps itself. And at various points, he also has these wonderful soaring melismatic lines. Again, a kind of Baroque imposition on the old Palestrina style, and you can only just imagine how effective it must have been in San Giovanni in Laterano, or the Chiesa Nuova, the other church where Casale worked, both of which were equally vast acoustics.
Our final piece is by Dmitry Bortniansky, so we're back in Russia now. And we need to remember too, for whom it's important, that Dmitry Bortniansky was ethnically Ukrainian, and like a lot of Ukrainian composers, became absorbed into the Russian diaspora as a musician. He's, as I said, been studying with Galuppi, back in Russia, special job as director of the Imperial Capella, and required through that job to write settings of the cherubic hymn, one of the pivotal parts
of the Russian Orthodox liturgy. Let us represent the cherubim in a mystic, thrice holy hymn to the life-giving Trinity. So here you hear the cherubic hymn being divided, of course, into those thrice holy sections, an opening, a second one very similar, and then a third one which often has a longer statement. Here, Bortniansky is working very much in block chords and in homophony, but then he shows off his contrapuntal training with a final section, the Yako da Tsarya Всех под именем, that we may receive the King of all, who comes invisibly escorted by angels. And here, this final allegro, really with its contrasting textures, the sopranos and altos singing quietly, the tenors and basses underpinning those suspensions, which very much echo the Italianate style that we heard with Casali. So it's a good place to finish, a good place to draw together some of our connections between Rome and Russia. It's been a huge pleasure to be able to present all these pieces to you. And let's hope, fingers crossed, that Costanzi Consort, along with a lot of other choirs, will be back up and running this autumn in 2021. Thank you for watching.